to continue this topic of what is versus what should be. I don't know, last several weeks, maybe 3 weeks, Don's been talking about this. And when he was telling me he wasn't going to be here this morning due to drill, I was thinking about continuing this and connecting it with what I've been reading and studying in John 1. So we're going to go to John 1, but before we look there, a few things. One main concept there in John 1. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about this more. And for the sake of those who weren't here, I have a couple people who haven't been in this study, or at least missed big parts of it. So when we talk about from a biblical or spiritual standpoint, what is versus what should be, how are you understanding? Let's just take them one at a time. When we talk about the Bible's emphasis on what is, what do we mean by that? How does the Bible address what is? Especially when you think of the fact that the thing was written, the last book was written thousands of years ago, the last part of the Bible. So when the Bible addresses what is, what do we mean when we say that?
The truth about us and the truth about God.
Okay, which are two unchanging realities, right? And even though we are not particularly mentioned in Scripture, us as individuals, nevertheless it says enough about our nature, what we're like, and what God is like, and that is, again, unchanging, right? So the truth about us, the truth about God, and then what should be, how are you understanding that? And is there anything that comes to mind from the last few weeks of conversations here in Sunday school that... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the thing that stands out in my memory, which sometimes serves me, is Don's, that verses, that comparison, and his question as to is the church in its character and position and ministry, should its focus be on what is or what should be? And he said, we can list should-be's on ourselves and others all day long.
Yeah.
And we're pretty good at should-be's, but we're not very good at seeing our nature and God's nature, our condition and God's character.
Yeah. We're less inclined to take a good hard look at what is true about what is, and we are drawn to what should be. What are some? Let's just elaborate on this for a minute. So what are some shoulds that either swirl around in your head or you hear them from the voices in the culture? What are some shoulds in life? Just any area you can. Literally, there's probably not a wrong answer here. Where do you hear the should kind of either being literally said or implied? Where do you sense shoulds in life?
To accept Jesus Christ.
Okay, so there's a religious should. We'll start with that one. Okay.
We should be better. We should do better.
Should be better. Should do better. How about examples of that?
Prayer, Bible study, attendance.
Okay, so in the religious sphere, the list of should believe in Christ, should do better when it comes to our personal prayer life, Bible reading, and of course we're absolutely advocates of prayer and Bible reading, but we have a tendency to create a list of shoulds in the religious environment. But I'm thinking of even just forget about religion for a second, just life, everyday, normal life that every American is living. And we could even broaden it and say everybody in the world. Where do we sense the shoulds? Where are they?
Nicer to your neighbors, more,
There you go.
not only neighbors, in general, friendlier to people,
Yeah.
more helpful.
Do you feel that in your mind a little bit, Sylvia? Like, okay, I want to be nicer, I should be nicer.
In my life, I try to
Yeah.
be nice to everybody, and I try to be helpful when I can.
Yeah.
I think it's a should.
Yeah, and I think, we all, live with that kind of assumption that we should, right? We want to. It's good. Where else?
Should listen to the kids more.
Should listen to your kids more. Should. That's another good example as a parent, right? There's things that we think that, oh, you know what? I see what I'm actually doing and what I'd like to be doing. This is where I'd rather be. I'd rather be where I was more attentive to my kids. Different spheres of life, sports like being involved with the girls' basketball. So they're learning, right? And they're at different stages of development in their learning. And as a coach, you're always thinking about what should be. You want to get them to what should happen in the next game. Okay, in the last game, we didn't do a good job of passing, or we didn't do a good job of breaking the press right on offense. And so now we want to work on that to get to where we should be for the next game. Any other examples? Really, we should be able to talk about this a lot, because there's probably countless.
Should cook healthier meals.
Should cook healthier food. That's a good one. More kale. You should use more kale. Figure out a way.
Vegetables.
More veggies. I should work out every day.
Hey, there used to be this saying, better, faster, stronger.
Better, faster, stronger.
Which you could apply kind of in any area. It didn't have to be athletic. I should be a better, faster, metaphorically stronger husband, father, parent, grandfather, uncle, on and on.
Right? Yep. So a lot of times it relates to our roles, our station in life, as a dad, for me as a pastor, your role, whatever it is, and it's what makes the world go around in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's kind of what gives us a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, we're all trying to get stuff done and accomplish things, get somewhere. It could be, academically, it could be professionally, it could be just in the area of parenting, it could be in the area of coaching. I mean, there's just non-stop examples of it, and it makes the life go around, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And just to be clear, I mean, the Bible, I think Don's been saying it, I think he said it a few times. I mean, it does have shoulds in it. I mean, it does speak to what ought to be, right? So it describes, you said earlier, Patrick said, it's, what is regarding human nature, what is regarding God and His character, and that's really the central aspect of it, the most important, the revelation of who our God, who our Creator is, right? And it includes shoulds, and so this was written up here. At some point, somebody either said this or implied this, the idea of law. And we were in Exodus, it wasn't long ago, we're looking at the Ten Commandments, and you've got, who can remember some? What are they? How do they go? Thou, and let's use the old English for you, Greg and Sydney. Thou what? Thou shalt, have no other gods before me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but that's exactly how Jesus interprets it, right? So, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall remember the Sabbath day. And then it goes down to the more practical human elements of you shall not kill, you shall not steal. Honor your father and mother, right? And even if it's not explicit, implicitly, there's a should there, isn't there? I mean, there's a should there. And that's for us to think about. It's good for us to have that on our minds, and we do have it on our minds. In some respects, Sylvia, what you said about wanting to be friendlier to people and nicer and more helpful to people, I mean, there's a relationship between that and probably how you understand even the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, the Bible includes shoulds, but what we've been talking about is, what is the main emphasis, and if we can agree that the main emphasis is on like the truth of what is concerning God and the truth of what is concerning man, if we can agree that that is the main emphasis, then we can agree that it's important to explain and to explore what that means, and to stop in our lives, which are so often caught up with what should be, chasing the next whatever, to stop and consider what is. And we understand, meaning as like a leadership here at our church, the way we think, the way we understand this book, we are regularly focused on, because we believe this book is pointing us to what is. And we think church, and even stopping for an hour or a couple hours on a Sunday, some of you are involved in Bible studies and other men's meetings, things like that. But every opportunity, it's like this, it's a chance to slow down, to hit pause on the should machine, the should mill, right, the treadmill or whatever, and just say, wait a minute, what is true regarding who my Creator is, who I am, why I'm even here in the first place, what really matters, what doesn't matter. It's a good opportunity for us to pause and consider those things. And so we do tend to emphasize this. And you see the biblical text emphasizing this, even though it still has things to say about this. And then John 1 has this, to me, really neat, impactful teaching about Jesus coming. And so it's the theme of Christmas, and it fits with that, and it has to do with the law. And so I'm going to read this, and I don't think we're going to dig into it right yet, but let me read it. So John 1, this is what we're going through in the sermon series as well, and this is a Christmas passage, even though it doesn't feel like a Christmas passage to me, because I'm so used to the what do you call them, the nativity passages in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Isn't there another term for that? But anyway, I'm thinking of those texts that you tend to hear read, and the old, remember the Charlie Brown Christmas special? And they read the one, I think it's Luke's Gospel they read from in there. So I think of that, but this is a Christmas passage, okay? All right, let's read it. And I'll just go from 1 to 18, and I'm going to skip a few verses in the middle, okay? So it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. He was in the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified about him and cried out, saying, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father. He has explained him. So I really want to highlight verse 17, and we'll talk about that. The law was given through Moses, but grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. But before we do that, let me erase this and just kind of illustrate a little bit, talk a little bit more about what we've seen in Exodus and how this fits with Exodus. So we spent a couple weeks talking about the tabernacle. Who can explain for the group or remind the group what that even is? Can someone explain that?
Well, it was a tent put in the middle of all of the different tribes, I guess, that had religious ceremony, an altar, had the big curtain in it that only the priest could go in.
Yeah. Good.
That's about all I got.
Yeah, good. But it was essentially a tent, right? But it had these special furnishings in it, which representative of, and you remember we've said it quite a bit, but it's God's presence there with the people, and so in every one of those furnishings was important as part of the presence of God, right? The table of showbread, the candlestick, the laver, the washing basin there, the big altar out front. And this here was, remember, the Ark of the Covenant, and it represents the real, like the presence of God, like the direct impact or connection with God right there, right? And we said it's neat how John uses this language in verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we said that word dwelt is really the word tented. He tabernacled among us. John is speaking of this concept. And so back then, remember we had the picture and there was all the tents of all the different tribes around. Just kind of, you get the idea, right? And you have God's presence right there in the middle of their camp. And so that's a great picture of the incarnation of Christ, where he comes into the world and dwells with us, dwells with his people, just like God, and really just like and in a greater way or a better way, he dwells among us in the incarnation of Jesus coming to take on flesh. And this is fun. It's just a fun one, but later in the New Testament, Paul uses the language of tent to describe the human body. He says our body is like a tent. Why do you think he would pick that imagery for the human body? Any thoughts?
It's
He
fleeting.
was a tent maker.
It's fleeting. Well, he's a tent maker, right? So he's real familiar with tents, right? This is something that he was really used to dealing with. And it's fleeting. And it's a good point, Hunter. I mean, you wouldn't choose, you might choose to live in a tent for a week during the summertime to go out and camp and have a good time. You're not going to choose to live in a tent all year long if you can help it, right? We have plenty of people who do, but most of us wouldn't choose that because these are lesser conditions in terms of comfort, heat, security, keeping out the elements, all that. And so to think of the human body as a tent, the human body's fragile. And it's temporary. It's a temporary residence that one day will be discarded and replaced by something more permanent, right? So here's this picture of Jesus, the Son of God, infinite, omnipotent, omniscient, all of that, and even omnipresent in a very real sense, and he confines himself to this human body, this tent of a body, to live like we live, to live where we live, to live like we live, to experience what we experience. That's a pretty powerful concept, especially when you compare to other notions of God, other types of gods out there who would never dream of doing such a thing, coming in such humility and experiencing and sympathizing with human frailty and weakness and struggle like he did. So John is speaking of that. He's speaking of that reality in the beginning. Here's God, and he comes and he dwells among his people. And one of the things he says about it, and now we'll go into this a bit. Law was given through Moses. So in this scene, you have Mount Sinai, right? Let's just do this. Here's Mount Sinai, and God gives the law, right? And so God gives the law through Moses, and it's given, to the people, okay? And remember, I said earlier, the law, in a very real sense, is kind of what should be, what ought to be. How people, creatures of their Creator, ought to live, including attitude toward the Creator himself, view of him, treatment of him, and as a spillover of that, treatment of other people. Write down the details of honor your father and mother, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't lie, okay? So law is given. And somebody read it again, verse 17 for me. So law was given through Moses.
Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ.
Grace and truth
Were realized through Jesus Christ.
Thanks. Realized, and that word is literally came into being. Right away, I'm going to abbreviate that. I mean, right away, what jumps out at you in terms of the difference between these two?
The law was given, and it was kind of an example. It was the way things God wanted it done.
Mhm.
But if you realize in the tabernacle, only the priest, high priest, could go there only once a year.
Mhm.
It wasn't open when Christ died for us. That veil was torn in two,
Mhm.
and he fulfilled what man could not fulfill himself by trying to keep the law.
Okay, so you said a lot there. So the idea of the presence of God, the Holy of Holies, Jesus makes access available to him. The idea of him fulfilling the law, right? Doing all that ought to be done, fulfilling, in one sense, the shoulds, although we could even kind of interestingly debate that. But go ahead, Dave.
Does it say, let's see, it says, and grace and truth were realized in the one I'm looking at. And it doesn't say but. Is that?
It depends which translation you have, you know?
No.
Oh, that's the old NASB. So mine says,
This one is just a semicolon. For the law was given through Moses, semicolon, grace and truth are realized through Jesus Christ.
yeah, mine too. Verse 16 says, of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. I actually did want to talk about that too, so let's back up there for a minute. So verse 16, is that what you're thinking of, Dave? Verse 16?
Yeah, I had always assumed it was a but there.
Yeah.
Like there's this huge difference between them.
Yeah.
And there certainly are. Like the law given through Moses, that's like the law given through God, right? And so it's just like, and we're never going to get to law. It would be great if everything was the way it should be, but it can't. It's just a train wreck.
Yeah.
But here's the embodiment of someone who can make it that way.
Yeah. So this word here is huge, you guys. So the word realized, which speaks of coming into being, and as we just talked about, coming into being in flesh and blood. You know, when we talk about the difference between a concept and a reality, like flesh and blood reality, sometimes we use that expression. I mean, this is to say, you know, what's that old phrase? That probably, I don't know, probably goes back to the 80s or something, but so-and-so's here in the flesh, right? Like, Hulk Hogan used to say it, I think. Thunder Lips in Rocky 3. In the flesh, baby. He was there in the flesh.
That really old 1980s saying.
Hey, to me too. Sorry, Greg. No, you were a young adult at the time. He was here, so not that this was not gracious, and that's what you're highlighting, I think, Dave. Like it's not like that it's contrasting as if somehow the law given was not gracious. That too comes from a gracious God, because God is gracious, right? But you get this idea, even when in verse 15, 16, of his fullness we have all received, and we talked about this in our men's meeting the other day, but if you like picture a container, right, and just overflowing, fullness is flowing out, and we've received grace upon grace, right? So what makes, in light of this, going from this to, thousands of years later, Jesus' life and death, what helps you make sense of this grace upon grace, or grace stacked upon grace? There's an argument about, okay, what does that mean? Well, what do you think?
So actually, when you pointed out that verse 17, it harkened to a conversation that David and I had the other night, where he brought up Romans 8, and more specifically Romans 8:3. For what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh as an offering for sin. He condemned sin in the flesh, so that the requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. And I just, I had to go back and, while you were talking, read that, and it just I kept flipping back and back and back, and it was like, it just...
Oh yeah, it definitely harmonizes, man.
Exactly, yeah,
So then,
So grace upon grace, I guess to speak upon that, this is kind of like, I don't know, the John, it felt like was I don't know, like kind of, it's like the prelude to what Paul was then saying in Romans of the prophecy has been fulfilled, of of Moses bringing forth the law, of just that no one is capable of fulfilling, and except for Jesus, and then Jesus coming forth as the temporary flesh of man that is full of sin, except for he's the only one who is able to fulfill the law, and yet he being the only one able to fulfill the law, he is the only one able to give us the grace of God, and so the grace is fulfilled through him, and
Yeah, it's good, man. So maybe another way to say it, because that's all good and true. I mean, the law that came on tablets, right? It says it came on tablets, and there's one place where it says God with his own finger, his own hand, inscribed the law, the 10 Commandments on the tablets, and he gives them to Moses, and Moses brings them there and reads them in front of the people. And you remember what happens when Moses comes down from the mountain, that one incident, he comes down, the people are worshiping the golden calf, they're already engaging in flagrant, idolatry and all of that. And remember what Moses did? What did he do with those tablets?
Threw them down, broke them, ground them up,
Chucked them.
and
Broke
made
them.
them drink it.
I mean, in one sense, like this is just kind of, you could say, this is just information in a way.
Jeff, but in the Old Testament, it's very specific, and the thing that's being said is God wants things done his way. People can't come to him another way. It's outlining all these things that man just can't make up their own way, and when they did make up their own way, we saw what happened at that altar.
Right.
Because it was so terrible.
So let's, it's good. Let's spice this up a little bit. I don't know where this is going to take us, but we'll just try it for fun. So remember the quote that was kind of controversial a few weeks ago? Ronnie shared this quote, or maybe Don shared it. I think I heard it from Ronnie. But so grace isn't so much about, how's it go? Grace doesn't make us acceptable to God as much as it makes God acceptable to us. That is a fascinating quote. It's loaded. I've spent weeks on and off, not the whole time, but on and off chewing on that, all right? And I think it's really, really helpful. It gets to a really helpful paradigm-shifting understanding of even what's going on with law. Like, why does God, can you just stop for a second and think about this? The God of the universe creates everything, all these living beings and all that, and says, hey, I want you to make a tent and put a table in there and some bread on it and an altar and burn some stuff on there, and there'll be a little candlestick, light that, and then come in these times and kill these animals and bring their blood in there, and not just like a little bit of instruction, but like a tremendous detail of instruction, okay? For God to use such basic physical objects and activities that would kind of seem a little bit strange, although back at that time they weren't that strange compared to other peoples and what other people groups would do. There are lots of different religious activities that were similar, right? So there's one idea that says, well, this was God, like God has this, you said earlier, Sidney, like this is his way for people to come to him. It's the only way for people to come to him, and that's true because it requires listening to him and following what he's prescribed, right? There's that.
It says who he is, the great I am, and that he's the only one.
Yep. And let me think for a minute. Go ahead, Greg.
And not to disagree, really am not. But I think another facet of that is the law shows me who I am.
Yeah.
Shows me who I am for who I am and what the ramifications of that are in reference to sin. And Jesus shows me who God is very clearly, more clearly than any other expression.
Right.
It's all a picture.
It's all picture.
All of
It's
that.
all true. And so I'm coming at a different facet of this that's all harmonious and true. But there's an interesting aspect of this that I just hadn't thought about, and that quote made me think about this a little bit more. So in Romans 2, it says that even Gentiles back then who had no access to Moses, the law, they're off wherever doing whatever, completely detached from God meeting with his people and whatever he was up to through Moses, right? They're off doing whatever. They're not even thinking about that stuff. But it says in Romans 2 that everybody has the law written on their hearts. And some people have taken that to mean, well, it's conscience or whatever. But I'll tell you one thing, one way to understand what it means. Remember we talked about at the beginning of Sunday school? A word that begins with an S and rhymes with ud. What's the word again? Should. Whether it's me, you, some tribal person in a third world country who has no technology, never heard the name Jesus, you could sit down with them if you could understand their language and talk to them about their lives, and I guarantee you they have shoulds governing their lives. Guarantee it. Ethical shoulds, they may be different than our American ethical shoulds, but they'd probably be similar in some ways. They've got ambitions and goals, and they certainly could tell you about things that the people around them in their tribe are doing wrong. They could tell you all about that. They think about the should nots that all the guilty people around them are doing. That is basic humanity. I mean, can we agree on that? That's embedded in human DNA since the garden, when God says, "Hey, I'm your life. I'm giving you everything." And Adam and Eve say, "Hey, thanks, but we're gonna figure out another way here. We're gonna work. We're gonna do. We're gonna go after things, pursue things. We're gonna make another way." You tracking with me? And shoulds have been human default operating system. Use tech language. Operating system language ever since, right? It's just that's the way it is. And so when humans' condition of law mode predates God giving the law through Moses. True or false? I mean, it comes after it too, but it also came before it. Before the word law was ever even uttered. Can we agree on that? So can we say that there's a sense in which for God to do it this way, because one of the things I scratch my head over is, why would you even do this in the first place? Why not just go right to the fruition of Jesus and what he's going to do? Why can't you just skip this step? Why would you even do this? And separate it by thousands of years of history of all this developing. Why? Go ahead, David.
That's always how I've seen it, and it's been even hard to get excited about Exodus, and I've loved the messages. Just dude, when are you going to get out of this? Get back to Christ. But now I can kind of see it's frustrating. It's so good to have it the way we have it. It would be frustrating to be back there in that tent. It's frustrating to live now, but that would be much worse in my opinion.
There's so much they didn't know and understand.
And to think it's up to me. To think it's up to me following those ceremonial type things that would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
They had sacrifice then, right?
Go ahead. What's that?
They had sacrifice then, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think maybe it's just to play devil's advocate about why back then, they to recognize that there's still you still can't we have these laws and we have these shoulds and we still fall short, so we still I love every single goat that I have in my herd, and yet I still have to sacrifice a goat because I keep falling short, and so I keep having to bring my favorite sheep to the slaughter, and it's driving me nuts. But but I love God more than I love my herd, and if I keep messing up, so I gotta it's just that I guess. Yeah, and so then here comes Jesus, the promise of that grace, so then you no longer have to like give up your favorite sheep. Just-
So here's, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I didn't plan on, I'm going to read from this in the sermon, but I'll give you a little teaser. This article, I had stumbled across this article on the New York Times just this past week, and it fit with what last week's message was about, and really about the whole series of God Down Here and what we're talking about. It's called Want to Get into the Christmas Spirit? Face the Darkness. And it's written by an Anglican thinker, priest, I guess, about Advent. Okay, you hear the term Advent, and we don't use that terminology. We don't use the religious calendar terminology around here much, and that's largely my fault. So if you don't like that, you can blame me and talk to me later about it. But we just don't do that. But that language you've heard, Advent, right? The weeks leading up to Christmas, and so this author, she's writing about Advent, and it says of experiencing joy and pleasure, how there's a build-up to that, how being prepared for that actually enhances that. And at one point, it says abstaining for a moment from the clamor of compulsive jollification, which is like a way of describing the holiday feeling, I guess, and instead leaning into the reality of human tragedy, can allow our experience of glory at Christmas to feel not only more sustainable, but more vivid, more meaningful. And what she's getting at, and it gives the example of like this saying, I've never heard it before, but she quotes the saying, hunger is the best condiment. In other words, to make your food taste the best, be really hungry. You know what that's like. You're starving and you sit down to eat something you've had 100 times, but for some reason it seems better, tastes better, because you're starving. You need it more, right? It's like the appetite has been created, enhanced, and now when you experience the experience, it's richer, it's fuller, because of the lack, it's filling, right? What if the human... See if I can tie it back to that quote. So what if we have a problem with God, really, we have a problem accepting Him for who He is, believing in Him for who He is, celebrating who He is, instead have a twisted, perverted version of Him that we've concocted in our own mind, and then we live with this combination of awareness of Him, but kind of resentment toward Him, and kind of, if we could just be God, we'd do it better, that whole thing. Like, what if, because of that mindset foundationally, and the law-laden, should-laden reality that is born out of that, what if God accommodates, meets us where we're at, and uses all this to say, hey, look, I know where you are. I know the mode you're in. And I'm coming to reveal myself according to your ways, and to show you, to enhance or to, in a way, exaggerate the appetite within you, to acquaint you with the emptiness and your desperate need to experience the spillover of the fullness of your Creator. What if it's that? Or at least partly that.
Yeah, that's great. That helps me see, like, He gives us a problem with ourselves. It's like, I would never cry out to God or give Him the time of day unless I had a huge problem with the appetites that I have. I want to live forever and I want things to be perfect. I just can't quite make it that way.
So, listen, this is amazing. She says, we suffer from a collective consumerist mania that demands we remain optimistic, shiny, happy, and having fun. But life isn't a Disney cruise. The tyranny of relentless mandatory celebration leaves us exhausted and often ironically feeling emptier. Many of us suffer from the holiday blues, and I wonder whether this phenomenon is made worse by the incessant demand for cheer, the collective lie that through enough work and positivity we can perfect our lives and our world. And the message of Christmas, the message of John 1, the message of the whole Bible is, hey everybody, you're working yourselves to death trying to make yourself happy and protect your world. And I've come to save you. I've come to acquaint you with reality, what is your condition, the emptiness of what is. To exaggerate that appetite, or to heighten that appetite, to then when Jesus shows up, it's like God's given us every reason to embrace him. He's the fullness of grace and truth. There's grace back here. There's certainly truth back here in law and Moses and what was happening. But I mean, for the flesh and blood reality of God with us, who is saying, I'm coming to give you everything. I'm coming to be for you in every conceivable way. I'm coming to fulfill you, to give you light that drives away the darkness, bread that feeds your appetite, water that fills your thirst. And God is not, he doesn't have a limited amount of that. He has an infinite amount of that. And we said last week, we had a little bit of an interesting debate, discussion about whether or not we hate God. And John uses language, you either love or you hate. And often we're in hate mode, and we said, well, as we think of hate, like, this is the way we kind of looked at it, right? So 2 containers. Those look like salt shakers now. Not meant to. We said when we think of hate, in contrast to love, we tend to think of, that guy. You know what I mean? Angry and mad at people and lashing out. Like, we think of hate in sort of that way only. And even violent. And look, it is that. That's an expression of hate. But we said, by biblical definition, love is focused on others, serving, giving. Hate is the opposite of that. Focused on self, taking, right? Serving self. If love is the outflow, just giving out, hate is the opposite, right? It's like sucking in, taking
Black
in.
hole.
What's that?
It's a black hole.
A black hole. It just takes. So into a world of hate and darkness and self-absorption and self-centeredness and demands and taking, to a world of what, apart from common grace, would become a bloodbath of carnage. Into that type of world, God pours out from his fullness love. And he shows up embodied in person, who gives and gives and gives. Jill and I had a conversation late last night about some family stuff going on. And both of us were saying, gosh, I wish I could be in a place where I could just be the one taking the abuse only and just take it. And just die in that sense for people. Just let them take out their rage on me and not fight back. I wish I could be that person. I should, right? I was shooting myself, okay? And gosh, that sounds terrible. You know the idea, right? I'm going to take this phone off. I'd like to be that person. I think you'd all like to be that person when the rubber meets the road and that's happening, pretty quickly acquainted with the fact that you're not. And that's what I was feeling profoundly last night, and Jill too. And we sat and we talked about this. I knew Jill wasn't going to be here today. We're just talking about, wow, it highlights the need for Jesus and the amazing nature of who he is and why this world needs him so badly. Because there's nobody else like that. Look around. You're not like that. Nobody else is either. You can maybe take a little abuse for a time. Some of you can take more than others. Some of your skin is thicker than others. But man, at some point, everyone has their breaking point. And Jesus just comes and pours it out, man. He's a drink offering. Just pour it out. He dies, and we get to what? We get to live. of His fullness we've all received. Grace upon grace. So hey, it's a magnificent picture in Exodus. For me, it's been a fun series. It's becoming more fun for David. Some of you are at varied places with how you feel about it. But we are seeing, it is amazing that it's like this preparation. It's this preparation for the good news of the gospel. The good news of Christ. It's always been the heart of God. It's not like his character doesn't change. He's not like shifting to another mode of operating. I think in a very real sense, He's meeting us where we already are. And revealing Himself in calculated ways. Remember it says in Galatians 4:4, for some reason we had to memorize this in college. In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a virgin or born of a woman, born under the, you know what it is? Law. So here comes this is, at some point, I'm going to talk about, that's baby Jesus. I know that's stunning. Who's watched the Mandalorian series? Any of that? Anyone watched any of that?
Little baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda is taking over the world.
Yeah, right.
He is eclipsing every other baby on Earth, including human babies. It's just, it's a... Google it if you haven't already seen the 5,000 memes that are out there and everything else. It's amazing. But living this perfect life, Jesus... I mentioned Baby Yoda and I'm all...
I know, you got me distracted too.
The perfect life.
Born under the law.
Born under the law, thank you. Living every part and then going to His death. And then invites us to come to Him. Come for peace, come for rest, come for fullness. And we need it, right? All right, it's good. Let's close with prayer. God, thank you for the time we've had this morning. Thank you for what You've revealed about Yourself. Some of these things are beyond us, beyond our capacity, beyond our mental ability to fully grasp, and yet You reveal Yourself and You open our eyes and You help us to see the truth of Christmas through passages like John 1. Help us to appreciate the coming of Christ. Help us to see His rescue in fresh ways in our lives. See our desperate need. And help us to receive, believe, and as You say in John 1, to as many as received Him, to them He gave the ability to become children of God. Thank You that we can be children of God. Thank You that we can be born from above. Thank You that You've awakened us to the truth. That we have Your Spirit, we have Your fullness, we've received Your fullness. Help us, God, to celebrate that and to live accordingly in the outflow of who You are and what You've poured into us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. All right, good discussion, everybody. I feel like we could have gone a lot longer. Time wasn't allowed. Yeah, thanks, honey. Thanks for your input, man.